All right, we are live. I am Bret. This is Eric, and we're here today to talk to you about all your infrastructure as code and the focus during KubeCon, because obviously the KubeCon keynote's wrapping up, and we are here as a part of that. But instead of the normal show that I do, where I have the intro and we have a guest and we have this is really all going to be about you all and everyone bringing their infrastructure questions, their code questions related to infrastructure. We were actually already having a discussion in Discord earlier. So thank you all for being here. If you're new to this channel, my name is Bret, and I'm going to let Eric introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Bret. I'm Eric Smalling. I'm a developer advocate at Snyk. My background's in software development and been a Docker user since like 2013 or something. I just, it's going to be awesome to do this together with Bret today.
Yeah. And we've known each other for a while now, and I want to do a little marketing of some of this stuff. So if you go below, you should find a link to our DevOps.fan, and I'm actually just going to show what we're actually in there. Let me share my screen real quick. Window, Discord. All right, so DevOps.fan, I want to put a link in the chat. If you're interested in joining our chat server. I think we have over 7,000 people in there now, so it's pretty exciting. Obviously, if you're at KubeCon or you're involved in any way with KubeCon this week, you are probably in the CNCF Slack, and I imagine we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you want to be a part of our server that's post KubeCon, come back to our DevOps Discord server. Hello, Mike. Hello, Payam. Hello, everyone. And let's do parallel watching us in KubeCon perfectly. That's perfect.
Awesome.
There's nothing confusing about listening to two different groups of people talking at the same time. Let's see. Remove. So I'm also new to this interface, so I guess it doesn't auto hide the chat. All right. So Eric, you've been focused on KubeCon this week while I've been on vacation. So
I've been trying. Yeah, it's hybrid conferences are always fun, right? So honestly, as you can tell, I'm not in LA. I wish I was, but KubeCon's been interesting. I was joking with some of my colleagues last night that I think we should rename this year's KubeCon to Cube Supply Chain Security Con, because that seems to be, as if you've been following the industry, that seems to be the number one thing this year so far. Let me share my screen real quick. I've got some notes I've added here. So this is, by the way, we're going to experiment with using HackMD for some live notes on here. And there's a link pinned to the top of the YouTube chat if you want to open that up. And you are welcome to make edits. I ask that you be nice, no graffiti, please. But later in the show, we're going to be doing example questions for if you want to add your examples, feel free to add it down here. While you're doing that, though, KubeCon news, I'm going to scroll to the bottom here. I've added some links to the sessions that I thought were interesting. Now, I come from Snyk is a security scanning company, so I've got a very, biased viewpoint. I attended they have a bunch of, what do you call them, co-located events or pre-cons, if you will. And I went to the Cloud Native Security Conference, or went to, attended most of the sessions for that. It was all good stuff. A lot of it felt like teasers. There was a lot of 10-minute quick talks there that were teasers towards full sessions that are going on yesterday and today. The agenda, actually, I'll just go back to my notes. It'll be easier to read from. The sessions I attended yesterday I thought were interesting. Nisha from VMware did a really good job with the building Sbombs for your containers and for actually your build pipeline, showing how to. She gave a kind of an example using Builda and a local registry to how to create SBOM inventories from your base image, and then she added Python to that and created another bill of materials on top of that. If you're not familiar, secure bill of materials is what SBOM stands for, and that's like one of the main buzzwords of KubeCon this week. There were other ones here. I'm not going to go through them all, but as I said, supply chain was everything. SigStore looks really interesting. Dan Lawrence and others have formed a new company called ChainGuard around that, and it's a startup to watch, I think. Ian Coldwater was everywhere yesterday afternoon with hacks on Kubernetes and Kubernetes-related things that should scare all of us. So it was really good. As a member of SIG Security, I was really happy to see the focus. And so today, the keynote has kicked off. They did a lot of SIG recognition, talking about SIG security, SIG network, SIG release, and all that stuff. So, and of course, I had to throw my my buddy Matt, his Snyk talk yesterday was, you have to go watch that because he's actually my boss. So
that's great. And we don't have, these links aren't actually in our HackMD, are they?
I'll make them into links after the show.
Okay.
Right now, that's just in the agenda. If you're
okay.
at KubeCon, I mean, everyone knows how to get to the sessions. You can go back and look at the recordings throughout. The agenda builder at KubeCon is can be challenging this year. I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know how much this is related to KubeCon announcements, but I saw some stuff that I didn't know about, like KPAC in the people chatting. KPAC, which is a Kubernetes native container build service. So I'm not a big build pack person, so I'm not sure if this is only, it looks like it's only for build packs.
I'm not, I've heard the name, and I believe it was around build pack discussions, but I've not used it, so I don't know.
I'm gonna have to look into it deeper. If anyone in chat has tried to use KPAC, I would love some feedback, because I'm always interested in ways that we can auto build and have a lot of the intelligence of just basically, why do I have to write scripts at all? Just take my code, build a Docker file, push it. It's like there's becoming a very standard workflow there, and I would really like to not have to reconfigure that every time in every repo for every app. And if there was some sort of larger tool like this that maybe would just, like it mentions that it auto rebuilds. I'm gonna put the link in Slack or in the YouTube chat.
Yeah, it's tickling a memory from when I was on the Kube Academy team. Shout out to Kube.Academy if you're looking for Kubernetes intro training stuff. And I think Cora did a course on container builds, and that was one of the topics. It sounds familiar to me.
Yeah. I mean, I've been talking about GitHub Actions for all the automation, but if there's something that's a little more traditional, like it just builds it, if it succeeds in building, then it pushes, and then you have some of that stuff that feels like plumbing, right? It just, every repo probably needs this stuff, and why shouldn't it just auto work out of the box? That's kind of the things I'm interested in. So I'm going to have to dig into this and see if it could be useful. I've also been following some of the Twitter discussions, but mostly it's just pictures of friends that I'm not getting to see in the real world.
Yeah, there's been if anyone who's interested after this, don't leave this, of course, but if anyone's interested, there's a Dims from VMware has opened a hallway Zoom, so anyone can join in. If you go to the hallway channel on the CNCF Slack channels for KubeCon, at the top there's a link in the subject for the channel. There's a link to that Zoom stream, and we were hanging out this morning and yesterday quite a bit.
I was wondering how to get to that, because I was seeing that, I saw the post on Twitter, but I didn't. They said in the hallway track it, and I thought,
yep. And we're all playing bingo. My bingo card is I got one more block. If I get gRPC in any session, I can win fame.
It's kind of amazing that that's the one that's remaining.
I know, it's ridiculous.
Wasn't it a keynote?
It probably was, and I missed it. It's probably happening right now, and I'm missing it, but that's okay.
Yeah,
we're gonna have more fun.
Yeah. All right. So we're waiting on you, the guests, to in some way give us something to look at. I think something that I just wanted to share was, it came out of Discord. We're having a discussion. Turtle Wolf, I'm not sure if they are on this live show, but we were talking about proxying and the challenges of, like, if you have an app Do you put Nginx in front of it? Do you put traffic in front of it? How, this was kind of not Kubernetes, so we're not talking about Kubernetes ingress necessarily, but we are talking about just Docker, simple Docker setup. And then specifically in their case, it was a React app. So then as a part of the React build, it's really just creating those static files, and that the React dev server is not the best. It's not the best way to run a production server. It's really meant for local dev. So you probably want something like Nginx, or maybe a more Golang native one. I don't think Caddy. I don't know if Caddy is a web server or only a proxy. I think it's only a proxy. I could be wrong. But one of the differences here is traffic is only a proxy. So you still need a web server to put there. And I know that this discussion is going to go down a rabbit hole of which web server should you use, just Nginx, something else, what's the easiest. But I think the point of all that, I was wanting to make the distinction here, is that if you're building a Docker container that's a web server, you're probably going to need a proxy in front of it. But I don't like, in the cloud native setup, especially when we're talking about infrastructure as code, I don't like to mix my web servers and my proxies. So we often talk about, like, if you're going to do something in Kubernetes, that you're probably going to have a ton of proxies and at all different levels, especially if you're using service mesh. So in the case of this, usually for someone, I will recommend, hey, look, if you React, whatever you're using, you want to figure out a web server for that. And if that is Nginx, sure, Nginx can technically be a proxy and a web server, but never mix the two in the same container, because that you end up with conflicting goals around serving of content on a web server and possibly doing like DNS rerouting or path rewriting or something like that. You're going to want to do that all in your ingress or your proxy. Either one's the same thing. So you're going to want to have that separate. And so when we're talking about infrastructure as code here, making sure that your infrastructure, like your ingress or your proxies, are separated from your app container. That's just a personal opinion. But that was coming out of our Discord server today. Matic is talking in chat about keyless mode. I don't know what that is. Private key is held in memory just long enough to generate code signing certificates and sign the actual artifact, and then it should be discarded. Yeah, the secure supply chain stuff, I got a feeling, I felt like I knew what Notary was doing and what Docker was doing, and then there's all this stuff coming out that I'm sure that I'm very quickly going to be out of date. Like, I'm not going to know all these things that need to be done in the supply chain.
And it feels like there's so many different ways to do it. And that's why Dan and team formed a new company around it, because it's just making it simpler for mere mortals. In fact, I believe it was their discussion. They were saying that they want SigStore to be the Let's Encrypt of supply chain.
Oh, okay.
Or something along those lines. I could be.
Yeah, I like that analogy. Sure. Yeah, to be sort of the de facto, what everybody does out of the box, best tool to scan container image.
I might be biased. So, I mean, you think, Paul? Yeah. So I work for Snyk. So if it's not obvious, and we have a container scanning tool. In fact, it's the one that we partnered with Docker to bake into the Docker scan command. So if you have Docker desktop or a recent version of Docker CE on your Linux desktop, you have Snyk available to you. And I'm not a salesperson. I have no commissions, so I'm not going to pitch Snyk, but it is free. So honestly, the best scanner is the one you use and the one that helps you. And our goal at Snyk is to have one that is developer focused, so that when you use it, it's there on your workstation. It's relatively fast. I would call it very fast. And it gives you actionable information. So it's not just a spreadsheet of CVEs. We try to include information around, recommended better base images as far as the vulnerabilities are concerned. We have a team of security analysts constantly updating our vulndb. So But honestly, there's a lot of good tools. Trivia's a great tool, uses the Claire database, which is an open source vulnerability database maintained by the community. And that's actually what's baked into Harbor if you're using that registry. So just, yes, use one. And that's the important piece, I think.
Yeah, I like it. On this topic, so one of the things that you're going to quickly need to worry about if you're scanning images, especially you're going to want to do this as part of your automated workflow. So you're going to want this done every time you build an image or every time the image is in a PR, right? Or something like that. You're going to need to come up with some workflow ideas around before you push something into production. If it's going to be scanned, you should probably be aware of that before it goes to production. Like there's no point in scanning what you've already shipped. So you probably want to think about where you're scanning it, how often you're scanning it, and don't rely on developers scanning locally. Even though kind of like linting and testing and all, we have all these tools that we can technically do them locally, but you really want to make sure that they're kind of a gate inside of your PR process. So for me, I love it when if a PR is happening in that PR branch, every build gets scanned so that the results that you'll see in GitHub will say you've got 5 high vulnerabilities or whatever. And that brings me to another point here is that like Eric's talking about, you can set up the CV scanning, but you're going to want it in more places than just a log hidden away. That's sort of a pass fail. You're probably eventually going to want more details out of it, and you're going to want to raise those details up. If you're using GitHub, look at whatever tool you're using, whether it's Snyk or Trivia or whatever, look at how that tool can present itself in the GitHub checks. That's in your PR at the very bottom, or in the security dashboard, or both. There's a security dashboard that you can see code out, things that are out of date. You can use Dependabot there, but you're going to want to bring this stuff to everyone's attention. And at some point, once you get really good at it, you're going to want to make it a blocker so that people can't ship new vulnerable updates to production and they're without some sort of administrative approval or 3 people approving or whatever. So there's almost like 2 sides of it: learning the scanner and then learning how to make sure that everyone's aware of the scans and that the scans are happening automatically.
I'm going to amend something you said, or at least I'm going to add to something you said there as well. You said that once it's in production, or once you're done with it, you don't have to scan it. I would contest that and say that the vulnerability databases are constantly being updated, and what's clean today might not be clean tomorrow. So whatever tool you're using, you want to make sure that there is a periodic review or a rescan or a something that will let you know a new vulnerability has been found in a container image that you've already published. Because it could be you have something in production that's going to sit there for a month, and if a vulnerability is found the day after you've scanned it, you want to know and act on it.
That's a great point. And that's not going to be visible in your standard PR process. This would be something,
right? You'd either have to have a proactive polling kind of a system or a solution that will go do that automatically for you. I'm not an expert on the other registry platform scanners. I know ours will do by default every 24 hours will let you know if anything new has been found.
Okay.
But it wouldn't be hard to imagine how you could do that with other scanners, and I would be surprised if others don't already do it as well.
Yeah, and that's a point where you're not scanning the servers at that point. You're scanning, like you would make some sort of regex on the type of images, or maybe some sort of tag or workflow that would allow you to know which images are in use.
That is the harder part, is to know what's actually live and what's no longer, what's sunset. And yeah, there are ways to do that our product does, but that's getting into
right. So is that a part of Snyk scanning an actual server, like a Kubernetes cluster?
Snyk has our paid tier has a Kubernetes monitor that has, I can't remember what we've released yet on that or not, but it will automatically remove what we call projects, which are live, actively scanned things. It will take them out when they're no longer being used. At least that's the plan. I don't know if that's GA yet or not, so I might have given away something. But
well, if you're on this call, then if you're watching us now, you know.
It's not. I'm sure our salespeople are talking about it if anything. So, but
yeah. Well, and that's, I think that's key too, because that's all part of the day two ops that is so hard for us to talk about, because often the questions are about implementation, like, the tool to use. But the reality is, you're right. You need eventually, the real challenge becomes, what do I have in production? What's actually running versus which images are cached, or what old images no longer are needed. There's a whole, after containers are replaced, we don't really have a great, I think, consensus in the ecosystem of how to clean up old images, how to know which images are no longer needed in production, how to know which images to scan in production, and not necessarily do it on the production servers themselves, because that can be a task you maybe don't want your workloads doing on the same nodes. Anyway, this is something I probably should do a whole live show on, and we could just make it a topic. scanning what's production.
Yeah, that would be. It's a lot of. It's a target-rich environment.
Yeah. Paul's asking, didn't know Snyk was in Docker Desktop. Just type Docker scan.
It's right there. It's at the CL. It's in the command line.
Yep. And that's technically a Docker plugin, right?
Yeah, that's how that's implemented.
So the nice thing is, when you get Docker Desktop, or if you install Docker Desktop, it will keep that up to date. And then it doesn't give you like a certain amount of scans for free.
Yeah, you have like completely without even having to go do anything at Snyk as far as creating an account. I think you get 10 free, and then it'll say, "Hey, go create a free account," and then you have 100 a month, I believe. Don't quote me on that. It could be 200. I don't remember. We have separate levels on our free tiers for the container scans versus the language open source dependability scans. Dependability. Gosh, I'm gonna wake up. Dependencies.
I know what you meant.
Yeah. Listen to what I'm thinking, not what I'm saying.
Not the words that are coming out of your
mouth. At least
mouth.
100 if it's not 200. We also are working. I'm working on formalizing our open source project support right now. Right now, if you have an open source project and you're using us for scanning your code or containers, and the free limits aren't enough for your project, reach out to me or Matt Jarvis, who's my UK counterpart, and we can get those limits up for you. And we're going to formalize that so that you can actually apply to have a supported open source project, just like Docker Hub does for open source repositories.
Nice. Excuse me. Next one. What is the best approach to implement an SE Linux policy inside the Docker container images?
Oh, I wish Matt was on the call. Are you an SE Linux expert?
I would not call myself an expert, but I don't believe that you can do this in an image. I don't believe that. So SE Linux is implemented at the host level, and so as I understand it, is very similar to AppArmor or any other kernel capabilities. You basically do this at runtime, and so it's going to really depend on, are you using Docker, are you using Kubernetes, and it's going to matter more, on your host OS. So does your host OS support SE Linux? And so what you'll want to do is you'll want to look into like Docker SE Linux, and you'll probably find it on the command line, which I'm just going to look up real quick just to see if I can remember it. It's going to be an option probably, and it may even be a daemon. You'll have to maybe configure the Docker daemon. All right.
In Kubernetes, there's a security context setting for SE Linux. I apologize. I am not a CentOS Red Hat expert, and thus I don't have a lot of SE Linux chops.
Yeah, that's okay. It is a pretty, like, you're either an SE Linux person or you're not. Like I pretend to like other things because I find SE Linux, I don't know, I think it's harder.
I need to get the coloring book again and learn it again.
Yeah, I think the first thing is under the Docker docs, not Red Hat. Searching on. So, for example, I'm just going to share real quick. So for example, on the SE Linux stuff, if you just search the Docker docs, which is what I did, you will find various mentions of it. And then like basically it talks about SE Linux in places that you will need to worry about it. For example, are you doing root-based or rootless? Certain things like volumes and whatnot can be problematic with SE Linux. So you'll see mentions of it in the documentation around bind mounts. And I think for implementing it, Amazon might have the better documentation, but I don't know because I haven't done it in maybe 4 years since I just made, I think, and that was just Docker. So the news nowadays is more about how you get SE Linux to work in Kubernetes, which can be its own set of problems. And actually, the Kubernetes project has been talking a lot about these policies lately on their blog. So it's actually appropriate for us to just point you to the Kubernetes blog. In July, there we go. So if you're thinking specifically around Kubernetes, you're gonna have to configure it. So I will put that in chat. And so you'll see that there's other things there, like we've got seccomp, AppArmor, the capabilities that I talked about earlier. And so each one of these things will have their own way of implementing their own requirements. I recommend for anyone that's going to get playing with that stuff to start with one. Just pick one of these technologies, and because they're all complicated, and you don't usually want to do seccomp plus Linux capabilities plus M or AppArmor. Like you really want to pick your poison.
Yeah. There's another. Let me share my screen real quick.
Yeah.
Here we go. There's a blog that Matt is my counterpart in the UK. He and I wrote this back in March, where we did a quick hit on security context settings, and he actually wrote the piece on SE Linux in here. So I'll put the link to this in as well. And it's just a summary. It's not in detail, but it's got some links. I think it might link off to the same page you just linked as well. If you scroll, there's SE Linux.
Perfect. That's probably a way better. Is this is Kubernetes focused?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Let's see. Does the Kubernetes monitor also scan the running container, not just the image it was deployed from? Oh, is this something about what you were talking about earlier?
Probably. And unfortunately, since it's not part of the free tool set, I don't deal with it much. Since DevRel, we don't deal with selling stuff. I believe, so the question is, run this running container. It's scanning the image at deployment time. It's not like Aquasec or something or Twistlock that'll sit there and watch the runtime, process itself at the kernel level. That's not our game. We stick on the developer, the source side of it. So if you're looking for runtime protections like that, that's where you look at the other tools that are out there.
Yeah. And that can be interesting thing about that is when I think about scanning running containers, it almost feels like I'm getting into not that isn't necessary in some cases, because sometimes there's just a requirement, and that's the requirement. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a requirement anyway. Because I'm sitting here thinking, like, I shouldn't really be installing anything in the container that wasn't in the image. So that's just like a gut feeling there of if that's a common problem where like the CVE scan of a running container is not as much different than the scan of the image. That sounds like a failure of the way that the Docker file is run, because you shouldn't probably be, apt-get install during an entry point script, for example, during container startup.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Biker knows that. So, he's been around a long time. He's a container pro. So
and this would get to where I would start talking about, IaC scanning around things like your Kubernetes YAML. And you should be, our tool will flag you at I don't remember if it's a low, medium, or high, but it'll flag you policy-wise as far as if you're deploying any pod that's not that is root owned or not read-write base. Right. And those things are all defense in depth mechanisms to fight against container drift after deploy. Not that they shouldn't, if you need it, you should run, things to watch, tripwires and things like that. But
yeah. How do you properly calculate what request and limit resource values your Kubernetes pod should have? Want to take this one?
I wish I had the magic wand. Profile your app. I mean, especially if you're I usually get this question. I mean, first of all, good that you're thinking about it, because everybody should be setting those things.
Yep.
But I usually get this question around Java apps, people who are lifting and shifting JEE or something into containers. And when I was in my consulting days, we used to run into a lot of garbage collection problems, especially in the older JDK, like 8 or earlier, where Docker or Containerd, it can start your JVM in a container, but the process is the JVM is going to see the host's memory footprint for setting up default GC parameters, heap spaces, and things, and you need to manage that. But profiling your app is something you should really be doing anyway, and figure out how much memory you need. Set enough headroom for GCs if you're Java or any garbage collected language. But just it's going to be different for every app. It's hard to give a blanket recommendation.
I'm looking at this tool.
Oh, and look at the readmes. Especially if you've got COTS software that's been given to you in containers, they should be telling you. That should be in your release notes for whatever products you're deploying.
Yeah. Do you remember the tool? I think it's made by Sysdig, that monitors for, and you all might do something like this too. So, what is it called? It's a Sysdig tool that open source, that I think it's an incubating project, that monitors for, like, you can see if someone runs a shell inside your container, or
oh yeah.
My brain is not working right now.
Is that Falco?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I know of this tool. I don't know of its comparables, but let me get this. So Sysdig Falco. This is a great conversation. We're kind of going down a rabbit hole with bikers thing, and then the running containers. It's not so much about the resources, but on the running containers, one thing that you can do, instead of scanning it retroactively, because if you're worried about hackers or bad behavior, it's a little too, in my opinion, it's a little too late to scan it later for different software, right? So what I would look at for, if you've got a production system and you're wanting to make sure that people aren't running a shell in there when they shouldn't, because they're probably, in a production system, unless something is broke, there shouldn't probably be no shells running, or no exec commands, right? And so Falco is one of those tools with a little bit of effort. Basically, it will sit on your servers and it can run its own container, and it will watch. Basically, you can configure it so that if you know that this pod only runs this Ruby script, you can make sure that nothing else runs in that container, or it basically alerts. I don't know that it blocks. I actually don't even know that. But it basically will allow you to do things like give you a log alert that you can then track elsewhere when someone runs an exec command, or someone runs a shell inside there, or someone runs an apt command, whatever. So as you understand the behaviors of your app and what it's supposed to be doing, you can start watching for things that shouldn't be happening, like running any sort of security commands or sudo or whatever inside the servers. That's what Falco is good at doing.
Yep.
And if anyone knows of other similar tools, please suggest them, because I don't know them all.
I mean, there's other commercial tools also that will do that. I mean, Aqua will do that.
Okay.
As I understand it. I don't work for Aqua. Right?
Yeah.
I remember them demoing that at a Docker meetup once.
Resource limits. We use Datadog, and it gives us great timeline profile, CPU, and memory. So this is a great point.
Yep.
This is how I would do it with the resources. Back to that resource question. Yeah, you have to kind of, if it's a brand new app and you've never run it in production, then I would say set them, the limits be very conservative, set things really high so that you don't accidentally kill your app.
Yeah.
That it always has what you need. If you're not profiling, like Eric's saying, profiling is ideal. But I tend to work in environments where we're taking an app that used to be on a real server and then putting it into a container. And so we just look at the running monitoring. Yeah. So if you're using Datadog or whatever the cloud tool, we're just looking at the monitoring and finding the spikes and finding, how much our memory and CPU our app really uses, and then we're setting it to that, usually very conservatively, and then over time, bringing them in.
My main point there was just with garbage collected apps or platforms, you need to give enough headroom for both the heap of your app plus the garbage collect process. And most people with people who aren't familiar with managing or operating a JVM app like Tomcat or one of its something that's based on that may not be aware that you need double. So Oracle's advice in the early days, I don't know if it's still the case, but a couple years ago, was if you don't know what to set your container limit to, you should be 2x your max heap.
Yeah,
because that gives enough room for a full GC to do its mark sweep magic and move things around and handle all that. I've seen places that were not setting that high enough, and the VMs they were running their nodes on were way too close. And as soon as an OOM happens during a full GC, it kills the process, and you don't get a lot of logs out of it. You get a big stack dump. And unless because they had an APM like I think they had Dynatrace or one of the commercial ones, they were able to see, oh, this is what was happening when that happened or leading up to that, and they had the GC logs. They could see that it would have said full GC here if it had actually finished it. So.
Yeah, it's definitely been more than a few times I've seen people get a little more aggressive on their memory limits in particular. I mean, CPU limits, it usually just results in your app having horrible performance, right? But the memory one, disk maybe less so, because disks aren't usually filled up by applications. It's usually filled up by not doing image cleanup. So pro tip, if you're running production servers or any servers with Kubernetes or Docker, you want to have some sort of image cleanup process. And because especially when you start deploying, like, I'm in projects with 2 gig PHP and Ruby apps, and every time that new image is shipped, there's another like gig of layers added to the server every single time. And if you're deploying daily, it doesn't take long to fill up.
That's up. CPU also is important to limit, because if somebody does exploit you, they're usually trying to crypto mine, right? That's the game a lot of the time. And if you don't limit your CPU, they get the whole node, and at least cordon them in until you can get rid of them.
The question came back up here about the Sbomb tool. Do you want to mention what you mentioned earlier? We would say just go back, but we're here.
So there's an entire conference going on this week talking about these things called KubeCon. The one that was shown yesterday that I really liked was it Turn? Hold on, let me get the exact name of the tool before I lie to you. This is an area that is under heavy development or attention right now. And there's going to be a lot of things. You're generally going to want to produce a SPDX or a what's the other Sbomb format?
Sbomb, I was actually going to ask you that. What are the most popular?
I'll get it before the call's over. SPDX is the one that Google is pushing. It's the is it CNCF? I'm not sure. But Turn, TERN, is the open source tool that was in that session I mentioned earlier. That's on demonstrating it. In fact, let me show you get the right screen, and I'll share screen. There we go. If you have a KubeCon, if you're registered, if you go to Wednesday's sessions and look at Nisha, this back to the drawing board, building containers and Sbombs. This session, she walks through a really nice demo of taking a simple, creating a simple Debian base image, creating an inventory Sbomb on it, pushing it to a registry along the image and the Sbomb, and then adding Python to it, creating a new Sbomb Delta, pushing both of those, and just kind of a pragmatic, here's how you could do it. And it's not this is how you have to do it. It's like if you want to do it with Builda, and I think she used Builda and she actually brought in a Debian tar and create it from scratch.
Oh, okay.
You know, if you want to go low level and build, you really want to build your own based images, do it this way. I chatted with her afterwards in the community chat and said, why wouldn't you just use an official image from whoever with DB? And she said, you totally could do that. And then you could SBOM that, and you could say, okay, inventory the base image, so we know what we started with is the one that we, you know, is here. The whole point being, you don't want to be like, you know, the SolarWinds or whatever, and end up having some kind of supply chain injection problem happen where somebody flipped in their own flavor of your base image, you didn't know it. Having those inventories allow you to validate, okay, yeah, the signatures matched for both of these bases when we did the builds.
When I'm thinking of something like a GitHub workflow that, you know, maybe I'm doing GitHub releases or something, if I was trying to provide Sbombs, I guess that would be a downloadable artifact as a part of the release. Wouldn't you create these on PR?
This is where I'm learning a lot about this as we go too.
Yeah.
This is where the folks from ChainGuard and the SIG store project are working on that. They were talking about sorry, I'm looking over here at my notes from yesterday. Yeah. They were talking about the was it Rector? I can't share that. Hold on, sorry. Let me copy an image here. Preview. This is live TV here.
Having fun with
this is going to be blurry because it's a.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a slide from the SIG store session yesterday in the middle of the day, and they talk about the history of tracking binary artifact signatures, right? And Rector is a project of the SIG store. If you go to GitHub and look in Rector is a repository, or it's a gosh, what do they call it? It's a way to store these things, right? And it's a way to be able to trace back. This session was really good because they went from showing how to trace a signature from a Git commit, all the way to a running container signature, and all the pieces in between, and go both ways.
Okay.
And you can get the identity, the subject for any one of those along the chain.
That's great. Yeah. Because it's hard to imagine and visualize that unless you've seen someone do it before.
And that was, let me find that talk. Sound like I'm a sales pitch for the SIG store guys, but that's a great project. Let me just do a find. I am not, I just do the SIG store. This is it. So the SIG store, how we started. And it's got Dan and Bob Calloway from Red Hat. They did a great job on this one. Unfortunately, the stream cut out at the very end as they were wrapping up, but I don't think any big content got chopped.
Okay. Yeah, maybe they have the offline and they'll eventually fix it.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you go to sigstore.com or whatever the new ChainGuard companies, that they'll have this type of a presentation in full.
All right. We're kind of related to the profiler question. I'm not going to have any answers for you, Srinath. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Any K profilers that you can suggest, let's say Java or Node. So my assumption here is that you're doing, like, it's not really a container thing, but that's my ignorance, because I don't profile a lot of containers specifically. Like, to me, that's more of a testing thing, and I'm not savvy on automating profilers inside containers against other containers. But I would assume it's whatever the tool is that you would normally use for that language. You would just have to do it.
Go to. Yeah.
Because if you're testing in containers, and profiling can be really tricky. There's a whole rabbit hole of going down. How do you simulate workloads against your app in tests so that you can then get accurate metrics around how it performed, and then do that in all of your PRs so that you can make sure you're not having performance regressions. like I've never worked with that team, so I would love to learn from a team that's already doing that. It looks like I'm ascending to heaven here, because like the light is just it's because of my camera and the sun coming out here.
Yeah, for those who joined late, Bret is on the road. This is a from the field report.
Yeah, let's see if I can lower my ISO a little bit on my fancy camera. All right, maybe a little better. All right, what other questions we got? Charlie is pointing out that in later Java versions, that's very important, that basically C groups are now something that Java will pay attention to.
Yep.
So that was a pain in the butt before. We had to make sure the command you ran in the container was matching your pod policy for resources, and that was always a pain. And now we don't have to so much. What is bit 9? It sounds familiar, like a bit 9 for container.
I'm not familiar with that one either.
Bit 9.
I know Cloud9. Isn't Cloud9 one of the Kate's provider or distribution?
Endpoint and server. Oh, this is an endpoint and server security real-time visibility thing. So this is like.
Oh, there you go.
This is like VMware. Oh, VMware Carbon Black, formerly Bit9.
Carbon Black.
Cybersecurity company. I'm learning. I didn't know
I would
about that.
imagine that the Tanzu folks can have info on that then.
Yeah, what was the Tanzu announcement this week? There's some sort of open source version that wasn't previously available.
The week before KubeCon, they had the DevOps Loop mini conference, and they announced the Tanzu Community Edition. In fact, I'm working with Josh Rosso to do a show on that to talk about the security, what they thought of there. I happened to be on that team back when the genesis of that kind of started, and it's a great thing as far as the layer cake of all of the different opinionated things that they're providing along with Kubernetes. Yeah. So in fact, Joe Beta had an AMA, and I was one of the ones that posted a question. It was like, okay, why now? There's so many distributions of Kubernetes out there, from fill in the blank favorite vendor.
Right.
Why are you adding to this list? And part of his answer, and Joe, if you're watching this later, and I'm butcher this, I'm sorry, but it was basically, there's a lot of people who want to use Tanzu or play with Tanzu technologies, but aren't ready to buy standard, advanced, whatever the tiers are of it now. And this gives you an opportunity to do that, but it also gives you access to the field services team's collection of best practices, if you will. I hate that term, but around productionizing a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah,
CI/CD, security, ingress, all sorts of stuff around that. A lot of the stuff that went into the production Kubernetes book that the 4 people from that team wrote.
Is that an O'Reilly one?
Yes, that's the one that we do a book club on. If you want to be in a book club for production Kubernetes, reach out to me. I can get you invited.
There you go. I'm not in this book club.
Waleed Shari and Carlos Santana and a bunch of us meet weekly. In fact, I'm way behind on my reading for tomorrow. So.
Oh, nice. So this is an invite only group.
It's anyone can join. It's just we just want to control how many people the Zoom link goes out to. It's that book.
Nice.
We are starting to get toward the end of it. We're on chapter 12 out of I don't know how many, probably 16. Multi-tenancy this week.
That's a problem that I'm okay not solving myself. Multi-tenancy it's a challenge that I don't really look forward to solving for anyone.
I think you and I are in agreement on
yeah, because there's 1,000 ways to do it wrong, and I don't even know them all, so I would do it wrong, and it would be a problem. I feel like you need to be like an expert in multi-tenancy just to even like that's like a dedicated Kubernetes role of someone is the multi-tenancy engineer, essentially. All right, Nicker has a question. A bunch of AWS credits I need to use in the next 16 days. What would you guys do with that?
I know Paul told him to go mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's what everybody's going to tell you to do. Look for extraterrestrial life. Use SETI or something on there.
I'm go work on your CKA, CKS, CKAD.
Yeah.
That's a great playground for that.
Yeah, use it to spin up clusters, test them, learn some Terraform that automates. I mean, I always, I don't know, a couple times a year I get a surprise AWS build because a surprise AWS bill, not build, because I use some example tool, you know, the EKS CLI or whatever, and I spin up something and then I forget, and then I get an email that I spent $100. And one time I accidentally, for a conference, I spun up like 100 servers for a workshop and then didn't tear them. I was testing it and I somehow didn't tear them down with the right Terraform automation, and I ended up with like $1,000 bill or something, and they forgave me. They did the whole forgiving thing. It was so nice.
Yep.
I told them, I was like, it was in the wrong region. So I changed the region later. So when I cleaned up, I didn't see that I had not cleaned up all regions. I had only cleaned up the region I was in, and I had like a backup plan or something in Europe, and I had an extra. Anyway, long story longer. Don't do what I did. Use your credits for good. Don't waste them. Yeah, Biker's giving the same advice. Yeah, take a class and build a cluster from scratch. You can burn up money quickly.
You could combine the two. You could build up a cluster that mines Bitcoin and do it all at the same time.
There you go. You could check all those boxes. Philip has a question around autoscaling with HPA, and I have not used this yet, so I'm not going to have any advice. Running without this behavior for some time, and a scale up can trigger another scale up because Java Spring Boot are using a lot of CPUs on start. Yeah. So it's like a boot storm, essentially. And I don't know.
Yeah, and I've been out of the consulting world long enough that I don't have an answer either. I'm trying to remember, doesn't autoscaling, does it have a warm-up?
Like, I would assume, that's what I would assume.
Whatever metrics you're gathering, make sure you just ignore them for an amount of time.
Yeah, so like the first thing I would search would be something like, pod boot storm or pod start storm or something like that for autoscale, just because this is a common problem everywhere. Like, this was the problem before Kubernetes. So my assumption is that either somewhere in the health, because this is a concern with health checks too, right? If you have too many health checks fail before the pod is ready, then you can have back off problems, whatnot. So Philip, I would say, sorry, we don't have the immediate answer for you, but see if some of those keywords can't help you find the right behavior. My guess is there is a YAML value that you just need to say, don't auto scale. You can only auto scale this once every 5 minutes or something. And that's a huge assumption on my part. It's because I don't know. Oh, they can't stand up GPU instances. Yeah, that's probably yeah. Free credits. Yeah, crypto mining. All right, so we're coming to the end of our hour, and no one has given us code to review. So who of those in chat have something to show us that we would not so much a code review, an IaC review? We were hoping to do some of that. I'm glad we're here to answer your questions and that you have some good ones. But let's see if we can get one before the end of the hour. I didn't bring one. I didn't seed any.
I put a couple samples in there, but they're kind of simplistic.
I'm trying to find your link. Where did it go? Which browser am I not in?
Thank you, Charlie. That looks like the option that we're postulating about.
Pod autoscaler and initial readiness delay. Yep. That looks like the one. Good job. Way to kill it, chat. That's why we do this live. All right. So yeah, I had examples. Why do I not have your document up? The other thing I would mention is I have this. I'm not sure I put it in there, but I've mentioned it before. there is earlier today in this call, we were talking about scanners. Like we were saying, Snyk is built in as a image scanner, built in the Docker desktop. I also have a GitHub Actions example for, let me put my screen up there. Yeah. So this one has more than a, also it's in parallel with this superlinter examples. These are both GitHub Actions, but one of the ones in the GitHub example is running Trivy. You can do the same thing with Snyk. They both have workflows, actually actions, they're called actions that are in the marketplace. So you can go look up those tools in the GitHub marketplace right up here. And there will be examples on how to build that. So you can if you're on GitHub, you can set up one of these tools to scan pretty quickly, like with a low amount of effort. So if anyone's not doing that, I highly recommend they do it. What I want to do in these examples is have a better example of linting and scanning during the whole workflow, as opposed to them being separate. Because you may want to have a workflow. You may want to, like, for example, fail if you have any high risk CVEs. You may not want the image to be pushed to the key or Docker Hub or whatever final image registry. One of the workflows that I'm not sure if this is the one, but one of these, the way that I tend to do it is I will build the image and then I push it to GitHub Container Registry, so GHCR, and that is where I sort of store the image temporarily, and then we do a bunch of testing with that image, and then if it were to pass testing and the PR is accepted or whatever, that's only then when the image will then be pushed to your production registry. It's something that I think bigger teams use, where they maybe they don't want all this temp stuff and dev container tooling and all this stuff that's not really production on their main image registry. That is where the production servers would only be able to pull from. So as you start to lock down your supply chain, you may end up saying, like, our production servers can only pull from this image registry. Yep. And that might ultimately end up being a different registry than the one that all your devs just use for everyday stuff. That's not really production.
Yeah, it's kind of like an ephemeral holding place that you promote up to only if it passes.
Yeah. What's weird here is that the GitHub Container Registry, even though it's no longer beta, it doesn't, at least I don't think so, maybe it still is, it doesn't have a way for you to do any sort of real cleanup after the fact. So what I'm really hoping is that they'll come out with some GHCR tooling that just says, based on these tags, auto delete images, or something like that. Right now, I think the only way you can do it is you have to use a third-party tool. I think it's maybe my other Docker Captain. It's not the genuine tool, although that is another one. If I can find it. Or if I can find it while we're talking, I'll put that in there. But anyway, that's a growing problem, is the complexity of all the different image artifact stores and where all these things are stored, that I'm constantly trying to make simpler. Any resources that focus on React? Oh, Turtle's here. All right. Like your Node course does. So I am not a React person. So that's going to be challenge number one. But my understanding is it's all going to be, by default, it's just going to be static assets. So I'd say step one is you just, those have to be in the Nginx image, like you were mentioning in Discord, and that you keep it simple out of the gate. So there's other, SSL cores, all these other things that are related to just production web apps that aren't really a container specific problem. And that might be where your problem lies. This is a problem we were talking about in Discord around taking web apps and making them work on servers with proxies in front of them. And there's any number of problems that it could be, which is hard to troubleshoot when we don't have an actual example to run and test. So I would say if you're still troubleshooting this in Discord, get an example that someone can do with like a Docker Compose up, and put that into Discord where someone will try to just run it. They'll just, clone your repo. If it's not open source, see if you can create an open source example that's really simple, that has your problem in it, because it's so much easier for us to help you when there's something that we can just quickly, port or clone and then up, Docker Compose up, whatever, Kubernetes apply, kube control apply, however you want to do it. And then if it doesn't work, we can all dive in and troubleshoot it. So that would be my recommendation for you.
Bret, we got an example in the HackMD. I'm gonna bring it up here.
There we go.
So Nick has put a Docker file in here and is asking us to let him know what we're doing wrong. Is that big enough, or you want me to grow the font?
Let's take that full screen and make that bigger.
Let me take the that's big enough to hold the whole thing if I can.
All right, so we're doing a node image, it looks like. And you're installing Nginx and libglue. So install an app, npm rc. Looking there at the middle of the copy commands. So, all right, so for the beginning, let's just start at the top. You probably, if this is going to be anything on your production server, that very first line, the from node TLS, you're going to want to pin that to a specific node version. So maybe this is just for simple dev stuff, but before you get anything close to production, that should be at least like, node 14 dot whatever, or 16 or whatever one is. I think LTS is 14 right now. I can't remember which exact version is currently LTS, but you're going to want to pin that, because that you don't want you don't want someone randomly changing the entire base image because LTS changes from 14 to 16 or whatever with the node people. The second thing there is apt-get update install is fine, but you want to do a cleanup right after, because you're going to save at least megabytes to clean up after that. So my first thought is you're going to need a fourth line there, and just go look at any of the official images that use apt-get, which almost all of them do at some point, and you'll see that standard line they have at the bottom. It basically deletes a directory. It's a one-liner, and you can look that up in, I don't know, the Postgres official image or the MySQL official image, something like that. Yeah, so Conrad's saying, shouldn't the base image be versioned?
Yep.
Turtle, I'm not ignoring you. Sorry, but your statements about the Udemy course, feel free to ping me in Discord later, and I'm happy to look into that stuff. If you got bugs in the course that aren't working, I'm happy to troubleshoot that for sure. Just find me in Discord or in the course Q&A or whatever. Thanks, Turtle. All right, so it looks like there was. I'm just looking for other comments on this.
While you were answering there, I was looking at something Biker had written, but did you say anything about maybe splitting this into a multi-stage?
I didn't, although I'm always a fan of multi-stage. So I don't teach a lot of multi-stage in my courses yet, and that's my bad. That's mostly because when a lot of the core stuff was done, multi-stage wasn't there, and it's multi-stage tends to require build kit enabled. So that's in the last 3 years that's only been the standard.
I mean, simple multi-stage doesn't, but
okay, that's
my
true.
Thought, and I'll bounce off you since you do this day to day. My thought here would be, if this is something getting deployed somewhere, not just running locally, that I would have a second stage here that starts from Nginx, from a version, a versioned tag of Nginx, and just copies the compiled node app in to that, so that you end up with an Nginx image with the node bits.
Yep, and in fact, if I just did, that's a great recommendation. So I'm going to bring up VS Code, and I'm going to make a new file.
And Biker, I answered you in the chat there. There is an option for Snyk to say, "Oh, don't show me anything came from the base image," which is often used, especially companies that have custom base images, because if group X is in charge of certifying that image, any vulnerabilities in it are accepted, and we're willing to live with those, then it's not the developers to use that image's job then to try to resolve them. So yes, that is an option.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm copying this this example out of here, out of the HackMD. I think I'm copying the whole thing. Oops. And we're gonna just edit it in real time, real quick, and then. And I'm not gonna be able to test this build because it's obviously not. I don't have all these files, so it's not going to really work. But
you want to take the screen share?
Yeah. So yeah, add to stream. There
Your screen's up.
All right, let me change. I have to share a different window. All right, so yeah, so if we're looking at this and then we're realizing, okay, really, like this down here, I think everybody can see this, right? Yeah. So the CMD should not be a shell script, ideally, because you don't want to encapsulate your app inside of a shell script. Obviously, I mean, there are ways where the signaling won't get processed correctly there. So I would also not use, I would not copy certificates. And maybe these are just dev certificates because you have that dev there, but I would not copy certificates into images. If you're going to be deploying this in production, you're probably going to use something like Kubernetes or Docker Swarm or ECS, and all those things have a way to store secrets so that you don't store them in the image. And if this is indeed really just a startup script that runs Nginx, then like Eric is saying, you have this node image up here. So we're going to change this to whatever, 15.0. And maybe we'll have that. All right. I don't know if that's the real version, but the latest version of whatever you want. So we're hard coding to that. Then here we're adding a to do cleanup apt by -dir. Find that again from a example production or any of the official images. Really, we'll probably have some sort of apt install thing. This all looks fine. So you don't need to do that. That is redundant unless you need to change permissions. So if this is a production image, you probably want to use the node user or some other user, but because you're running as Nginx, Nginx already handles that for you. If you were running a Node app or a Python app directly or a PHP app, I would tell you to worry about which user you're using there because it would affect this. And then, so yeah, we can comment that out because you're just creating the directory. I do have some really old examples where that in my course is there. It's more as a teaching. I was teaching how to make a directory with a run command, but it's really the worker, if it doesn't have the directory, it will automatically create it anyway. So this is more efficient. This down here, you can copy. For example, you can just say web copy, make less of these command lines. So you can do that and say that. And then you won't need this line. And then assuming that you don't need the startup anymore because we're going to be running Nginx directly, I'll take that out. So now what we're doing is we're doing an install, we're copying our app in, and there's probably, if this is, I'm not sure what's in the start, if they're going to be talking about this in their, in the chat, but what's in their start script, I'm assuming that's somewhere in there running a command to create this static app that you need to put Nginx in front of it. I don't really know, but that command should probably be down here, like build static assets. And then, like Eric is saying, then you will have a from Nginx as.
You don't even really need the as on the last one, right?
Yeah, you don't really. But if you wanted to target it specifically,
true. That's a good point.
You could, yeah, Nginx, whatever the latest is, I don't know. Just go look. I have a browser in here. It's not going to work. Oh, now it's okay. So whatever the latest Nginx here is, right? We're going to pin to that. Just looking up. So 121.3, right? So we're going to pin there. And then down here, you will probably do something like from we need, well, we can't use 0, but we're going to call build /app. And then up here, maybe we'll just call this node. And copy requires at least 2 arguments. I thought that that's the correct syntax. It might not correctly pick up the from, but
it should be the right syntax.
Yeah. Someone in chat probably knows what I'm doing wrong there, but and then down here, this should, because this is an Nginx app, the default command probably doesn't even need to be there. Yeah, this
right. You just use whatever comes with it.
Yeah. This is automatically gonna
be exposed probably also.
Didn't comment that.
Now you might copy in your own Nginx conf here if you have specifics, but
yeah. So because this is running your app, this is where I would say separate your proxy out. So you're going to have, so you would not need 443 here because you're not going to store a certificate here. This is just going to run your app. I'd probably run it on a non-root port, just in case you were to ever need to run this on a server with no root privileges. You're going to want to run it on a high port. So I would probably do that. Configure my Nginx to run on that port. And then you're going to have another container or like a Kubernetes ingress or maybe a traffic proxy, or you can use a different Nginx as a proxy with a different configuration. And then this is now just your app and it just runs on 8080. There's something else that will worry about certificates, SSL, all that stuff.
Yep.
All right. So
this gives you the benefit of not only having an Nginx that is the supported official, so you're not having to be an Nginx expert as far as installing it yourself and configuring it, but it also then only has Nginx and your app. It doesn't have everything that the node build tool set has in it at runtime. So if somebody were to exploit your app, they don't have, there's a lot of tools they don't have now that they would have had otherwise.
Yeah. And then you're going to shorten this one up here, so you no longer need to install Nginx.
Oh yeah.
So take that out. And then we still need to add that line there to clean up at the end.
And to Conrad's point, you probably would want to have a version on that libglue if you could.
Yeah, so this is the way you get this. There's an apt cache command that will show you the version. I think it's an apt cache command that will show you the version installed. And then it's going to look, something like whatever the version is. In fact, it's probably going to, this is all Copilot, GitHub Copilot trying to guess what the name is that I'm trying to put in. Oh yeah, sure. I have no idea if that's anything close to real world, but that's what it would look like, is something like that. Yeah, you want to pin those versions too. Great point. Thank you. And that's probably about it.
There's people talking about the user in your image. You need to use user if your base image doesn't already set it to a sane base image. So if you're using distroless, you're probably pretty good because they already have done that for you. I think Nginx might actually do that for you. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I looked. One thing to note about user that I didn't know until not long ago in playing with it. If you're deploying to Kubernetes, if you use user node, for instance, and you deploy with a PSP or some other kind of thing that makes sure that your security context has run as not root set, the kubelet will not deploy that image if you're not also declaring your user ID in your Kubernetes manifest, because the kubelet doesn't know that node is not PID 0 or UID 0. So you want to make sure you use user 1000 or whatever it is in your Docker file if you're going to use the the image default when you deploy your pod.
I have I'm just looking this up in browser. I have Con 19, some of this stuff in my DockerCon 2019 repo, where I show like an advanced multi-stage. Let me switch. I'll put this in chat. We'll make this the last thing we do here. And then let's see, share. The Nginx is kind of, or the node examples are really good one, I think, just because it scripting languages like this, like any JavaScript app or a Python app or PHP app or Ruby app, they're all going to have these fundamental problems where you're going to need to get apt-get or yum dependencies first, and then you're going to probably need to do some build stuff, maybe building static assets if it's a website, so that kind of thing. And then if you're only serving static assets, then you want to copy all that output to just an Nginx image, and you don't need that build stage. So in here, this one's not using Nginx, so it's not like a React app, but you can see some of these examples from my 2019 talk about how we do some of this stuff. We only install development stuff for development. We separate out production from development so that we can do things like test, but then if things work, then we create a production image that doesn't have all the dev stuff in there. So you can kind of, those of you that are in chat, you can see that link and you can look at that on your own. But I would incorporate some of those into this as well, where I would separate out some of the production concerns from the dev concerns as you mature, so that you're not shipping all your dev and test tools to production. With NPM, it makes it pretty easy because you can tell it only development or only production when you do an install. You can see there on line 17, I do a nodemon for development. So it watches your files, assuming you bind mount them. It'll watch your files and then automatically restart the server, but you obviously don't want to do that in production. So in a production, we're running node directly. In the case of this example, the Nginx is running directly. So, and mentioning the user stuff. Thank you for, you must use user, but that's not going to be the case in Nginx. So like, you don't need to worry about that in your build image, your build stage, right? You're really only worried about running in the production, but the production is running Nginx. So before you start using the user in an Nginx image, you need to make sure that your Nginx can run as a non-root user. And that's one of the things, is it can't run on port 80 if you're going to do that. It can't run on 443. So I usually, for production stuff like Nginx, one of the things that Nginx does out of the box is it runs as root, but then it spins off workers that run as non-root. So for a lot of companies, unless they just can't allow any root user in a container, the default configuration with Nginx will be what they start with, which is running as root. Even though it's root, because the workers are not root, you've got a little bit less of a security concern. That way, because at some point, something's going to have to run on port 80 somewhere in your Kubernetes cluster, unless you have an external load balancer. And when you do that, that thing is going to have root. So anyway, just keep that in mind. But thank you, DevOps and Cloud Computing Training, for that recommendation, because that's a good reminder about the security stuff. If you're interested more in the security stuff of these Docker files, I have a whole security first. I will put this URL in chat. So it's a list. It's my personal list of all the things in order that you should be doing about your container images and running your containers. It doesn't focus a lot on Kubernetes. It focuses more on the lower level stuff, like your Docker file, like your Docker commands, and those things will just trickle up into your Kubernetes pod security policies or your mission controllers. So a lot of that's already in here. I'm just gonna put that in chat. I'm not gonna go through all this stuff because we're running out of time, but that's all there for those that are focusing on the security side. And I try to put them in order so that the thing you don't want to do is implement, you don't want to go and just like implement app armor or SE Linux when you haven't done the very basic things like prevent sudo or not running as root or using user namespaces instead of the default, which is not to use user namespaces. So I do put these things in order because often you'll get better bang for your buck and less work if you start at the top of my list and work your way down, because the things at the bottom, like running, like we talked about earlier, running Trivy maybe is a little bit easier, but then as you get down here into rootless, content trust, the Falco that we talked about for running and monitoring things in production, these all get more advanced. They require custom policies. You have to know your app really well to implement them, but the things at the top do not. The things at the top are the things that you can do in a Docker file or with a very basic Docker config change. So thank you for that. All right, any other questions before we wrap this up? I don't see any.
Paul was asking if there's any way we can store the after file somewhere to compare.
Oh, yeah, I can put that in a gist. Make a different image. Let me just make sure that it's like worth posting. But I will copy that into a gist. Somewhere I have a gist maker, but inside of my
back into the HackMD if you wanted.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Let's put it under the show notes or something. Turtle wants to watch us again. That is sincere praise. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'll give you a hint. If you take a Post-it note and you can put it over my face, that way you don't have to look at me for another hour.
All right, I'm pasting that in. Don't know if --Docker. That's how you did it. Is it a --space Docker when you're putting it in the Markdown?
I don't think you need a space, no, for the formatting.
Yeah. I don't know why it wants to give me an equal. Save. All right, so I put it in there in the HackMD. Probably should put a description in. So I'll update that after the live stream. But yes, I will give it 5 minutes, Paul, and I'll have something up there. I'll do that right after. All right. Well, let's say we wrap this up. Thank you all for showing up, and I will be back here live next week. Let me see if we have a schedule for next week. I think is next week the tree, Beth? Oh, okay. Okay, so we will not be here next week. So stay tuned. If you're curious about this live stream, I'm here every Thursday. Next week may be an exception because I'm probably going to be in the air in an airplane. So that will be one of the rare weeks that we're off. But if you want to keep up on all the news of what's going on, let me go back to my browser. Didn't mention it at the beginning, but if you go to Patreon/Bret Fisher, and if you just click the follow button there, you will get any updates or any of the show plans we have. So that way you'll know, are we going to have a show? Who's going to be the guest? That all always happen there once a week. And then you just click that follow button. All right. So thanks so much, Eric, for being here. And thanks to
it was fun.
You be here.
I was going to just, since you're not here next week, I do actually have a talk next week that addresses a little bit of the discussion about the base image and then the secondary images and the tertiary images and scanning across that. Not from a technical, here's how to type it on the line kind of stuff, but more of a higher level, non-Snyk, really just how do you apply that to your business. I'm going to post a link in big long link. Sorry, it's got a lot of UTM in it, but it's just that's just info about it. But feel free to come in and heckle me on that. I don't know if that's free or not. If it's not free, then I'll also post. I've done the same talk at DevOps Days Boston. If you go find the recording of that, I'll post that afterwards too.
Great. Yeah, and then obviously we've still got KubeCon today and tomorrow. So for those of you watching, just I'm trying to follow it on Twitter. So if you have questions or want to talk about things on Twitter, that's also another place you can go to discuss with us, because both of our, actually your handle's not there, but you can find his through mine because I've been tweeting about him all day. So and then we have the Discord. I just put that in there as well. You can chat along with us in Discord. It's a DevOps server that's dedicated to this stuff. So for those more complicated and specific issues, like the DevOps and cloud computing training person is talking about some stuff, but that's the deeper technical stuff. Just move over to the other chat and we'll be in there later. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see you either next week or the week after. Ciao.
Bye.